Well, welcome back to Line and Length with AJ King. For our first episode last week, we had the great Simon Dart, but for episode 2, we step it up a notch. The great, dangerous Dan Lonergan, a media sensation, over 30 years in the business, and the face of Game Face right now. You can hear him on every platform. Dangerous, thanks for joining me.
It's a great pleasure to be here, mate, and congratulations on the new show. It's going beautiful.
So, mate, you've missed out on the footy season. What have you been up to?
Oh, look, I've been keeping busy. I mean, it's disappointing we didn't have any local footy. The AFL kept us going. That was good. It's been tough being at home, trying to keep busy. I've been able to run most days until I stepped on a ball, Glenn McGrath style, a week or so ago, just before I went in to have some surgery to remove some more skin cancers, which I can tell everyone if they're interested that they're not cancerous. So that's been a tough week. So I haven't run for over a week, but I've kept busy. Working for Game Face, writing articles. I'm doing a bit of work for Swinburne, teaching some sports media, which I really enjoyed to young guys who are looking for a career in the media. I did say to them, you're mad, guys, why you want to get into the media? But that's really been great because I just feel that there are some talented people out there. And having been in the industry a long time, AJ, I feel I've got plenty I can offer, considering I've been lucky enough to broadcast sport at a high level. So I'm really enjoying that. And it's nice to do something a bit different.
And that's exactly right, mate. And just to sort of touch on it, you've done a fantastic job with getting Game Face to where they are in terms of the commentating. And I can't thank you enough for the help that you've given me over the last year. It's been fantastic. And, there's going to be plenty more years to come with you. But let's get back to where it all started, mate. Xavier College.
Yeah, I went to Xavier. I started at Burke Hall, which was their junior school in 1979. So I'm a lot older than you, AJ, and finished there in 82. That's in Kew, and then went down the road to the senior school at Xavier. Look, to be honest, I didn't enjoy it. I was a bit of a square peg in a round hole. I was bullied a lot. I didn't handle the bullying, which some might say is just fun teasing. I saw it as a bit more than that. Look, I was statistically minded when it came to sport. I had an encyclopedic knowledge of sport. I loved it. I got involved in the Year 12 footy team as the timekeeper, and also we had a sound engineer that, with our football team being a very strong team, played in the Herald Shield, which was the midweek competition, which ended up being the curtain raiser to the night grand final, as it was in those days, a midweek competition for the VFL sides. And Xavier won it in 86. Andrew Gowers from Brisbane and Hawthorn played in that, Luke O'Sullivan from Carlton. And I got a chance to call that. And that was probably where my broadcasting passion started, where I thought I'd love to make a career out of this, as Peter Donegan and Bobby Skilton were calling the game for Channel 7. And in those days, they used to play it a few days later, replay it on a Sunday morning. And Peter Donegan said to me, and look, I'll always remember this. I mean, it was early days. I was 17. You've got a bit of a future here, son. You've got the basics. Do you want a career? And I spoke to him a little bit, and I went to radio school after that, and then was able to pursue it through country radio stations for many years. Got my start, AJ, at 3HA Hamilton, and they were calling the local footy in those days, which was Western Border, teams in Western Victoria, Hamilton Imperials, Casterton, etc., and teams in Mount Gabriel. That was a great experience. It taught me how to call football, and by 1997, I achieved my aim of going to the ABC. It took me 8 years. Didn't think it was going to happen for a while, but I became a cadet, an old cadet at 28, and that was absolutely fantastic.
So just getting back to it, calling that game for Xavier, did you approach someone to do that, or were you asked, or was it just something that you've sort of been watching on the TV with the VFL? It would have been probably all AFL early days back then, and you just got into it, or was it just something that sort of fell into your lap?
Well, I knew it. Look, that's a good question. I normally can remember all those miscellaneous things, AJ. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that they knew I was interested. And I might have approached them and said, look, are we going to commentate it? If so, I'd be interested in doing it. And I think Tim Clifford, who's a great man, he was the head of the sound department at Xavier in those days and did it for many, many years after I left, said, okay. And I roped another guy in who was keen on it. He's now a lawyer, so he's making a lot more money than I ever will. Good on you, Kieran O'Brien, if you're listening. And we did it together, and we had a great time doing it. And I really enjoyed the opportunity, and I just thought, this is me. This is what I want to do. And I'd always thought about doing it as a kid, a young kid, listening to Graham Dawson and Harry Beitzel in my early teens. But then I thought, how do you get into it? It's not realistic. So I thought I wouldn't mind being a lawyer. Biggest problem was probably not smart enough to be a lawyer, certainly not smart enough to be a doctor. And then this opportunity came up, and I then started pursuing it and ringing Smokey Dawson and ringing Peter Booth, driving the mad, and Tim Lane and other commentators just to find out how you get into it. And in those days, as I mentioned earlier, country radio had an avenue. It doesn't nowadays, sadly. You can get in via a platform like Gameface on social media or community radio stations. But in those days, a lot of country stations called the country footy, and it was a terrific way to begin.
It's a great thing what you said, because, to be honest, it's identical to what I sort of thought about when I was younger. I was always someone that could remember the footy record with jumper numbers. I loved watching the footy. I loved, calling it at home. As a bit of a joke, I used to get called Bruce McAvaney for the fact that I just knew things about footy, and I used to love that. But there wasn't a pathway until now, until Gameface, which is great for the social media side of things, and it's pretty similar pathway.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's disappointing what happened with country radio. Unfortunately, they felt there wasn't much money in it. I know that the Ace Radio Network, where I worked for a long time, which had stations or has stations right throughout Victoria, they basically have all of country Victoria covered. And a guy called Jeff Hambry owned them. His wife was Helen Hambry, who's the sister of Rupert Murdoch. So there was big media ownership background there. And 3HA Hamilton and 3YB Warrnambool called their local footy. As I said, 3HA Hamilton did the Western Border League, 3YB Warrnambool did the Hampton League. And then for a long time, they decided they didn't want to do it. Now they're back doing it on a Saturday, but still, like a lot of country radio stations, they are automated, which means that it saves them money during the week, and they just basically play music and would record music shifts. But I think they do get a bit of sponsorship on the weekend by calling the local football, which is great because, again, it gives guys an opportunity to learn how to call a game. And, I mean, at the end of the day, I know the AFL's a step up. It's where we all want to be. But calling footy, whether it be at local level or at AFL level, AJ, is still the same way as far as I'm concerned when I'm teaching young guys how to do it. You've got to know where the footy is. You've got to give the score as often as you possibly can. You obviously got to say when there's a change in possession, which team's got it. Obviously, if it's a goal on radio, you've got to describe how the ball was kicked, what sort of marks taken. And that's why I've always loved radio ahead of television, because you can basically be your own person in that you've got to be descriptive and you're painting a picture, and you can use your imagination to tell the audience what is actually happening on television. It's all in front of you.
So in 1997, you got your cadetship at the ABC. What did that entail?
Well, early days it was learning. They didn't think I was quite ready to call matches. So I'd take my tape recorder along and go to games. So I had my media pass, and there'd always be a spare box, I suppose, in those days, because there were matches on a Saturday afternoon. There was often more than one match. You still had the around the grounds when I started. Nowadays, of course, it's just one match on at the one time. Occasionally on a Saturday, you might have one game start at 1:45, another one at 2:10, but not so much, certainly with Thursday night footy coming in. But in those days, there was generally a spare box at the old press box at the MCG members. So I'd go there and I'd practice, and I called a game at the very start of the year, round one. It was back to Western Australia. But I was so nervous, AJ, that I actually lost my voice. I think that my vocal cords were a bit too tense, and I'd lost my voice by the end of the match. It was actually the Bulldogs, who I follow, as everyone knows, playing Fremantle, and Winston Abraham kicked the winning goal, and everyone in the West said, oh, that guy's so biased. It was because I lost my voice. But gradually I got better, and then I started doing the Saturday night games, which weren't as prevalent in Melbourne in those days as they are nowadays. And I called a few at Waverley, the only year I called at Waverley, and it's pretty hard to call at Waverley because the box was at ground level and you were seeing right over the top of the ground. If the ball was in the forward pocket, at the other end, it was pretty hard to see because you're almost like you were on a cliff, and there was a little enclave going over the other side. You were going down the cliff where the ball was. So that was certainly a great challenge because using binoculars wasn't easy early days as well. So there were a lot of challenges in the first year, but working with Dwayne Russell, a bit with Tim Lane, a bit with Peter Booth, it was a great experience to learn from them. I mean, I've still got my tapes and occasionally I'll listen back, and I called so quickly, way too quickly. And I thought, how did I hang in? But then I went to Perth next year, and Glenn Mitchell was one of those great broadcasters, very pure broadcasters. And I got an opportunity to learn a lot from him, especially cricket, which I didn't really get many opportunities in Melbourne because Tim Lane was there and Peter Booth was there. But certainly in Perth, there were more opportunities. But the first year was learning and trying to get better and do some interviews and get involved in grandstand and basically just find your feet.
You just touched on Perth there, mate. That was your big break to get over into the AFL?
Well, it was. They told me that when I got the job at the ABC, because what happened, AJ, was that I went for the cadetship, and there were 2 cadetships. It had been a long time since the ABC had actually employed people. Because in 1991, they had 30 staff in ABC radio in sport, and they cut them into half because there wasn't enough going on. And the rest that lost their jobs in sport, radio sports, kept their jobs but went into TV, sport news, etc. around the country. So they've decided that 11 years down the track that they needed, or less than 11 years down the track, the demographic within the sports department was getting, I suppose, a bit older, and they needed some younger guys. But they needed guys with a bit of experience as well. So I applied for the cadetship. I made the short list of 8, but Clinton Grivis was already doing some part-time work for them, and I knew that he was going to get the Melbourne gig, and I finished just behind him, and Peter Newlands got the gig in Sydney, eventually went down to Hobart. But on the eve of the AFL season in 97, George Griliicic decided to leave the ABC because he'd had enough, and 6PR in Perth, which was the equivalent to 3AW in Melbourne, offered him a job, and that was because he was marrying his second wife, and he needed his pension from the ABC or his superannuation to buy a new house. You need to know George to know that that's just George. And most people would find that incredible, but that's George Griliicic. He's a very unusual man, but what a great broadcaster he was. So what happened was they told me, you've missed out in Melbourne, but we want you to apply for Perth. So I've applied for Perth, and again was told that if Clinton doesn't want the job because they want him full time, we'll take you, but we think you'd be better suited to do the cadetship in Melbourne. But Neville Oliver, who was in charge at the time, said, I reckon you'd be better going to Darwin because there was a job up there. But I said, no, I'll take my chance in Melbourne and hope that I'm good enough after 12 months. It's only a 12-month contract, AJ, so there may not have been a job for me. But luckily, they wanted Clinton back in Melbourne after 12 months to do basketball on TV as Peter G went down to Tasmania to read news. And the rest is history. I went to Perth. It's pretty tough, the other side of the country. If you're an Eastern Stater, you are the enemy. They have forests on their shoulders, but they're generally pretty nice people. But it was a great opportunity for me to know that I'll be calling every week, either West Coast or Freo, and I really enjoyed it. And the opportunity also to broadcast state cricket whenever WA played at home in the one days or the Shield. And I certainly learned a lot about that game, which is a lot more technical than just the statistical side of it, which I had a very strong knowledge of.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to touch on. In about 2000, you started doing the state cricket and international cricket, which led to the Olympics as well, which is a great feat. But how did you adjust from going from footy, getting over to the cricket side of things? Was it a big change?
Well, it was. It was. I mean, I always thought that, not that I ever tried to take shortcuts, AJ. I watched the way Glenn would prepare. He was the greatest preparer of anyone I know in regard to his broadcasting. I mean, watching him do the cycling, he was a genius at that, and that's a very hard sport to do until you start to understand it. I'm starting to understand it now with the stuff we're doing for Game Face, the points races, etc., the Keren, and he's marvellous at that. And cricket was his passion. So I learned a lot from him, but early days I used to get a few players wrong, and I'd mix up the left-handers, right-handers for some reason. I might mix up the field when the left-handers batting, hitting it on the offside to mid-wicket. because there's a left-hander, right-hander combination, and you don't realise you've done it. You're concentrating so hard that you're making mistakes. And look, I'll be honest, I thought I understood the LBW rule better than I did. The big issue with Glenn at the time was his constructive criticism used to put you down a bit. And you'd think, well, am I ever going to improve? There was another guy called the late, great Wally Foreman who worked for WACE and did some part-time broadcasting for us as well. WACE is the WA Institute of Sport. And he was a wonderful mentor to me in being able to give you positive feedback. And I've always been very big, AJ, that if I got an opportunity to teach young guys how to do it, I would always be positive. I'd always say, okay. And Wally said to me one day when I was calling the cricket and I got a run out wrong, he said, now, Daniel, I heard the call of that run out, not convinced you got it right. Let's catch up and have a coffee, and this is how you do it. You tell me what you reckon you did wrong, and I listened back and I was embarrassed. It was a lot worse than I thought it was going to be. And I said, oh, well, it's terrible. He said, well, you can say that, but I don't like other people saying that to you. Yes, you can improve. Where can you improve? And when I left, having had that meeting with him, I felt 10 feet tall, and I was able to be better because you give yourself some self-confidence. But cricket's one of those sports where you've got to have a lot of topics. You've got to have a lot of ideas. You've got to know your experts. If it's Kerry O'Keefe, you've got to be on your toes the whole time because he's going to hang it on you. If it's Peter Roebuck, you've got to be well prepared and understand the game, particularly the off-field nuances of the game. And I got to love cricket in the end because you always knew that it was going to be something different. And the play wasn't always in front of you like the footy. You just let it unfold with the footy. But if you got the cricket right, I always felt fantastic because it was such a different and challenging game to call, but a magnificent game to call, as you would know.
Yeah, so tell us about some of the characters in the box of cricket. I reckon you can have a lot more fun in the commentary box and being around them than you do in a footy sort of commentary box. It's more on call the footy, isn't it?
Well, Drew Morford and Mark McClure were great in the footy with the quaddies and things like that. But you're right, once the game started, you're underway. You're 2.5 hours and you're just concentrating on doing the best call you possibly could to be as accurate as you can. Cricket, you're right. It was a lot more downtime. You do your 20-minute stint and then have a break. If you're on with Kerry O'Keefe, you're just watching which direction he's going. And he was just mad. And the funny jokes that he'd come up with, the funny lines he'd come up with. But he also had a great knowledge of the game. And I think that got lost a bit because he sort of was an accidental inclusion that we needed someone to call a test match 2001 in Sydney. And Peter Longman said to Jim Maxwell, what about Kerry O'Keefe? Even though he'd been out of the game a long time, over 20 years. And he had done a bit of media and we gave him an opportunity and the rest is history. He was just fantastic. And look, he was a character, one of the great men. Jim Maxwell was wonderful too, great broadcaster, just very laid back, great knowledge of the game. Really good fellow to learn from as well. He'd give you little subtle feedback that you'd have to think, gee, Jim's just given me some feedback there. But you've got to, you had to be on your toes to sort of take that feedback. And Drew Morford, well, he was just one of the best blokes I ever had the privilege of meeting, the late, great Drew Morford. Wonderful commentator, a bit blue at times, AJ, but one of the very few guys that could get away with that when he wasn't on the microphone. People just loved him. He just had that boyish feel about him. In 69, he sounded about 40. And he went way too soon. He had so much more to give. But we were lucky to have great people. Mark Ridgway was another one who was a different cat. It was just a good time in the cricket box because, as you say, you had more time to probably get to know these characters. Peter Roebuck, very, very serious, very serious. And unless you knew your stuff, he wasn't interested in working with you. I remember when I did my first shift with him, I was perspiring because I had to make sure I got it right. And then when he had a look at the roster later and saw my name and he was on, sometimes he'd say, no, won't do it with him. I've got something else on. Oh, Dan, look forward to working with you again later. I'm thinking, okay, well, I must have been okay. So, because he was a very complex character, as you would be aware, AJ, and very tragic death, of course. But look, love the game, love Zimbabwe cricket, love South African cricket, just love cricket in general. And he was one of those guys that you learnt so much from when you're in the box with him. And
did you feel that you got a lot more access to the cricket guys when you were interviewing compared to the footy players? I see it as a bit more, you get a bit more out of the cricket sort of interviews.
Well, it depended if you had the rights, and the ABC's always had the rights. It's been such a big part of what the ABC has done for many, many years. It's in the ABC's DNA. I mean, as you would be aware, AJ, the PO box is 9994. What's Donald Bradman's test average? 99.94. I mean, that's the ABC, cricket. And it's starting to change a lot. I've been gone from the organisation now for well over 5 years, and they're not doing as much as they used to do, which is sad. They're doing a lot more, of course, on their app, as everyone has changed with social media nowadays. So that's good, but not really on the analogue as much as they used to. But, yeah, there was. Because, as I say, we were the rights holders. You'd go down at the end of the day's play, and I didn't do much test cricket. I did a lot of one-day internationals. So I'd often, sharing the role with Gerard Whateley in later years, but I'd often have the role of being the around the grounds person or being the roving reporter. I'd go out and get interviews at lunchtime, before the game, after the game. So you'd have to be down there 15, 20 minutes. They'd bring someone out. So if Chris Rogers made 100 and he'd been dismissed, they'd bring him out. If Pat Cummins took 5 wickets, they'd bring him out. If it was an ordinary day, they might just bring the coach out. But there'd always been an interview, and then he'd go and do the press conference as well with the rest of the media who weren't the rights holders. So Channel 9 would get it, and then we'd get it. And, you would get more access. You get more access to support staff as well. And we now know nowadays, AJ, that there is so much support staff within the Australian team, and they've got great stories to tell. I mean, Frank Damasi has been their security manager for a long, long time. He's got some wonderful stories to tell, Frank. And the guy is the manager, Steve Bernard, the former New South Wales fast bowler, did it for a long time. And he had a lot of he was a great person to get access to as well. And you're right. It was a bit easier to get access to the cricketers because you were the ABC. If you're any other organisation that weren't the right holders, it was a lot tougher.
And not just footy and cricket, mate. You've done 2 Olympics. That must be something that you look back on, you're pretty proud of.
Yeah, 2000, 2004 and 2012, but who's counting?
3, sorry, yep.
No, that's right. 2000, yeah, outstanding. I mean, I was a bit lucky 2000. I was young. I was in Perth. I was the last person on. And I remember saying to Glenn Mitchell, I said, now, Glenn, what do you think I should do? How do you think I should prepare? He said, well, Daniel, because Australia are going to be represented at every single sport, they didn't need to qualify because it was a home Olympics. You're going to be doing the minor sports. So you're going to be doing volleyball. You're going to be doing handball, European handball, which is a great sport, AJ. I don't know how well you know it, but it's played indoors, and it's a bit like soccer in reverse. It's a great sport, and the Europeans are good at it, and the Asians are good at it now. The Asian countries are getting better and better. But Australia have only ever had one handball team, and that was 2000, and they got a lot of their players from Norway and Denmark, who are very strong teams, to say, okay, you can come here on a visa for 3 or 4 years, work and live here, and play for our handball team, so we can make sure we've got a team in the Olympic Games. So I learned all the minor sports. And the only minor sport that I didn't learn, but I knew a bit about, was weightlifting. And we're about 4 days into the Olympics. And in those days, we were doing a lot of the sports. We'd started to save money off TV screens in the International Broadcast Centre, except the athletics, the swimming, the gymnastics, the hockey and the basketball were the main ones that were done elsewhere. Everything else was off the screen because often they weren't in Sydney. They might be in different parts of Sydney, a fair way away. So you had to do them off the screen. So I'm leaving the box after having done a volleyball game to go into the recording studio to record my summary. When I hear Graham Smokey Dawson, the legendary ABC commentator, he'd lost his voice. And Smokey was talking to Alan Marks, our executive producer, and he said, "Oh, I'll be right, Marks." And he was doing the weightlifting. And he said, "No, you won't. You're our main guy in the IBC. We need you for other events." And he said, "We'll find someone else." And he looked up at me and he said, "Dan, what do you know about weightlifting?" And I dropped an expletive, AJ, and said, "Oh, Marksy." And he said, "We're about to find out, aren't we?" And I said, "Yeah, I suppose we are." So I had 30 seconds to get in. And, of course, it was a new event at the Olympic Games called for the women. The women were actually involved in it, the clean and jerk and the snatch. And Smokey was having a bit of fun with that. This is a children's show, but I think you know where we're going.
Yep.
So he put all this paper in this box. You couldn't see me. All you could see was the paper. I thought, gee, if someone lights up this box here, it'll blow up, because you couldn't see me and just all this paper. But we got through it, and I really enjoyed it. And they gave me another opportunity to do some tennis, and I did a bit more volleyball. And then Lauren Burns was going pretty well in the Taekwondo, and I had a day off, and everyone else was busy. And they said, "Well, there's only one person who's learned any Taekwondo," Glenn Mitchell said. "It's Lonergan. He's on the day off, though. Where is he?" Glenn's rung me. "Daniel," as he used to call me, "where are you?" I said, oh, I'm just at the hockey. Get your, we used to talk to each other in pretty blue language. Get you, where, into the IBC. Now you've got to call the Taekwondo. And of course, I've run in, I've got in as I do, sweating, and got to call the Taekwondo, which was great. And it's an adrenaline rush when you've got to do sports like that, when you're not as prepared for it as you are for other sports. When I say I learned all the minor sports, I had a bare bones knowledge of it. The other story I'll tell you about 2000, AJ, was the archery came up, and Simon Fairweather was going well to win a gold medal and subsequently did. Now, Peter Wilkins was about to call a soccer match with Roger Wills. And Peter Longman, our boss, said, Wilco, we need you to call the archery. Wilco said, what's that? He said, well, we've got Simon Fairweather about to win a gold medal. I don't know anything about archery. Does anyone know anything about archery? And I've come out of my box. I was doing the volleyball. I said, yeah, I do, Wilco. How many notes have you got? You got one or two? He said, no, I've got a folder full. I've got about 20 folders with me. I always overpacked. And so I've sat in with him as he's done the archery. And he did a great job, just talking about the wind and, the bullseye and everything like that. That's why I love the Olympic Games and why I love the ABC. And it's sad that at this stage we're not going there in 2024. The opportunity of doing different sports. I mean, in 2012, I did the slalom canoeing and the sailing, and we called 3 gold medals. And I was told about that in October. So I'd go to the Sandringham Sailing Club, got to know them. Mind you, my big issue was I'd get seasick, so my head would be over the boat. Even though I'd go out and go in different classes, and I'd write all my notes down, and then they'd say, oh, gee, Dan, how are you going to go doing the sailing? I said, well, lucky I'm in an IBC studio, boys. I'll be right. I don't have to go out in the boat. Oh, you have to go out in the boat. No. I'll be right. So, but I used to have a bit of fun with that. But it was great doing those different sports because it gave you more knowledge and I think gave you more credibility. And I loved all that. 2012 in London was the highlight of my career. Such a great city, such a great vibe. I mean, I didn't think anyone could do it better than Sydney, but of course, technology had kicked on since then. And I think London was a bit better than Sydney only because it was 12 years later, but it was absolutely fantastic. And one more quick story on that. I always remember I had a day off on a Saturday and I'd caught up with a few friends who were living in London at the time. And then I went into the main stadium and England were killing it. They were dominating. Had a big day at rowing. They had a big day on the track and field with Mo Farah, and they won, I think, the heptathlon, and Rutherford had won the long jump. And I've been down to the basketball to see the Dream Team and see the Australians in action. Been to the hockey, and then I came past to go back to the Olympic Stadium. And there were all these people on the mound watching the television. And the soccer was on. And the Poms were in another penalty shootout to try and survive. And as you know, they've never had a lot of success in world tournaments in England, even though it's the number one sport. It's king. Yeah. And, of course, they got beaten again and they started whinging and whining. And I said, hang on, you guys have just dominated the games today. You've had the greatest day in the history of the Olympics. You've won all the cycling as well on the track. And one bloke said, oh, brother, I won't give you an English accent because I'm no good at it. Oh, brother, it doesn't matter. Soccer. Football's the king over here. And he was right. I couldn't believe it. Even though they'd had a great day and won every gold medal known to man that day, it was still all about the football, and their team had failed again. It was unbelievable.
Mate, you've just reeled off an absolute number of sports, but 2006 Commonwealth Games, boxing.
Yep.
Tell us about that, mate, because a family friend of ours won the gold medal, Brad Pitt, who you covered.
Yes.
So you would have been pretty excited with that.
Yeah, the painter from the Mornington Peninsula. Yeah, that was fantastic. Look, I was there for every single day of the boxing tournament, and that was one of the events that we actually went to and watched. So I was there every single day and watched every single bout. It wasn't on air the entire time, but Australia won a few gold medals, and Brad was great. He was very solid right throughout the whole tournament. I sat next to the great George Griliasic, who was working for 3AW at the time, and George was on fire. I don't think he was all that well then. He subsequently died of cancer a few years later, but I learned a lot from him because he was a wonderful boxing commentator with Benny Pike, who used to work at the ABC, former Australian Commonwealth Games representative. And, yeah, that was a great experience. And I always remember I was recording a fight. They were recording a fight of one of the Australians, and Alan Marks came in and he was talking in my ear the entire time. It's not easy, AJ, to have a director talking in your ear, whether it be television or radio. It doesn't happen in radio that often. But he'd be telling me everything that was going on to make sure that I understood. And it just gave you a real adrenaline rush. Zappafinger got beaten, but then the same thing happened with Brad Pitt, and he was winning, and you just had to watch that they made sure they gave him the point. A couple of times I thought he should have got the point, and it was just wonderful. And I spoke to him after he won his gold medal, and it was a pretty special time. But we did really well in the boxing because the English and the Northern Irish were expected to dominate, but Australia sort of held their own, and that was a great result for them. And gee, it attracted a huge crowd. And what I liked about the amateur boxing was they all wore headgear. I know people have got their issues with boxing, but the fact they all wore headgear, I think that made it better.
So you've done it, as we said, a number of sports, but let's get back to the AFL. Mm-hmm. Who's the best you've covered the game with?
The best broadcaster?
Yeah.
Tim Lane. Tim Lane's the best broadcaster because of his eloquence, of his ability to capture the moment, the way he can change with the light and shade, the way he can pick the game changing, such as Bulldogs having a good few moments here, slipping away for Melbourne, slipping away for Geelong. He was just wonderful. He could make comments having been doing the game for a long, long time. And, it was great broadcasting with him. And again, like Jim Maxwell, he was pretty subtle in the feedback he'd give you. If there was something he felt you could do better, he'd tell you. But if you asked, he wouldn't necessarily give you a lot of information. It might just be off the cuff. But I love calling with Tim. He was wonderful. I also love calling with Drew because Drew was someone a lot different. Drew was he called radio a bit like television. There'd be a lot of gaps, and because he loved the pausation. Pausation is very important in radio too. And he taught me a lot about pausation, and he was always having a lot of fun calling the game, and with that young voice, that boyish voice. And you got to remember, I grew up with these guys, AJ, watching them. Yeah. And they became friends of mine. I mean, sitting there having conversations, and you just thought, how good is this? I mean, you don't try and put them on a pedestal. They're like any other normal human being. But to work with them after growing up idolising them and learning so much from them, it was fantastic. But if I was to have a podium finish, it would be Tim Lane from Drew Morford and Glenn Mitchell, just for Glenn's purity in regard to being able to broadcast any sport and being just one of those commentators that was line and length. He just was the perfect ABC commentator in regard to knowing what you had to do. And the other one who was completely left field, who was a great mate of mine, was Peter Walsh, who I worked with in Adelaide. He was, with the loud shirts and was a very different commentator, but again, a great commentator. So I've been very lucky. I'm
glad you said Tim Lane because I reckon you might have seen this little slip-up he did about Luke Tapscott. Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't.
I'll make sure you get online after this and get to YouTube and see what he accidentally called Tappy one day. It's a good one.
Yeah, he didn't make too many errors, Tim. He was always very, very good, very accurate, very reliable. And if he did make an error, he wouldn't be too happy about it. I know that. Peter Booth was another one I love working with. I didn't call a lot of games with Peter, but he taught me a lot about broadcasting, especially broadcasting the ABC way, which was, I think in the end, when I was made redundant from the ABC, I loved calling it Triple M too, and I had a great time calling with Brad Seymour, the ex-Sydney Swan, yep, and James Brayshaw and Wayne Schwass, who was very giving as well. My style was a bit different in that I was, as I say, line and length and quite serious and down the line, but you just had to give it a bit more levity. I mean, they had a great time. I mean, remembering to say Triple M rocks football thanks to McDonald's. For McDonald's, Triple M rocks footy. I mean, I'd leave that out occasionally and then think, oh, we've got to go to an ad. We've got to break it apart. And you could throw the odd slang word in. It was very different, but Lee Simon gave me an opportunity when no one else would after I left the ABC, and I've always been indebted to him for that, doing 2 years with Triple M. It was a great experience.
Have you ever copped a spray from one of the athletes because you've been in the wrong place at the wrong time, maybe in cricket if they've gone out or had a bad day or anything like that?
Oh, Mick Malthouse.
Yeah.
But everyone copped one from Mick Malthouse. My first press conference, it was the Easter weekend. I was heading back to Melbourne for my brother's wedding. I'd only been in Perth a month. This was 1998. So I was pretty excited about that. And I'd probably called my best game up until then. Glenn said, you're starting to get the hang of this, Daniel. It was good today. So I was feeling pretty good about myself. And I've gone down to the presser, and all the Perth boys knew me a bit by then. And they said, well, because you're new, Dan, you're going to ask the first question. I said, over my dead body, boys, let me just settle in first. And I waited. He was just eating them all up. He was just a pain in the backside, basically. And I thought, okay, let me just see how I can ask this question without getting a spray. So I thought, Michael Gardner, he was a young player. He was in his second year, just starting to find his way. And I thought he played okay. I thought I'll ask him a Dorothy Dixer, a full toss, AJ, in cricket, which Mick can put away or play back to me, whichever way he'd want to. I said, now, Mick, Michael Gardner, starting to find his way. You must be thinking that being the number one draft pick, he looks like he belongs. All the boys looked at me, nodding their head in appreciation that I've sort of asked a reasonably good question. No way I could get a spray. Haven't seen you before. Number one draft pick, isn't he? Of course he belongs. Of course he belongs. Has to belong. If he doesn't belong by now, he's not good enough, is he? I mean, giving him an opportunity, if he didn't belong, he wouldn't be playing, would he? And I was just deflated, and I sort of laughed to myself a bit. And at the end of it, Kim Hagdorn, who was a very experienced broadcaster over there and former state cricketer, played a couple of games in the late 1970s and a brilliant district cricketer for South Perth, where Bruce Laird, the former Australian player, played all his cricket. And Sean Graff went over when he went over for a year. He played in the premiership side at South Perth. He said to me, gee, you're unlucky. I thought it was a pretty good question. When I say good question, easy question for Mick to answer properly instead of giving you a spray, but he just gives everyone a spray. I said, oh, well, I'll just have to get used to it, won't I? And I mean, look, he was okay. I met him a few times, Mick, and he was okay when I got to know him. I've called a bit of footy with him for the ABC. He's fine. And he remembered that. He actually apologised to me. You the young bloke that asked a question about Mick Gardner, I couldn't believe it. A long time ago. He said, oh, I didn't like the Perth media. I didn't know you were from Melbourne or knew. I said, that's all right, Mick. A long time ago. I didn't lose any sleep over it. I actually used it as a badge of honour. He said, yeah, all you people, well, words to that effect, all you people did for some reason if you got a spray from me. But, yeah, he's the only one I reckon that got stuck into me. I've been pretty lucky, I suppose. Maybe I haven't asked enough hard-hitting questions, AJ, but that hasn't been my role, like the Craig Hutchisons and the Caroline Wilsons and the Sam McClures, etc. My role's been to broadcast, which is what I've always loved doing.
True or false? You got the nickname The Screen.
For a little while, yes, I did. Yes, I did. My mother wasn't very happy about it. My wife at the time most certainly was unhappy about it. Look, John Harms is a very good writer. Most people, when they get a profile piece done on them, especially in the media, it's a pretty positive one. With the greatest respect to John, it was done in the age when I was heading our football coverage, and I was probably an accidental leader because Tim Lane left on the eve of the 2003 season. Dwayne Russell decided not to stay at the ABC. He said, I'll go to 3AW if you match my money, and they did. So I was left holding the boat a bit, and they got Drew in to help me on a Saturday, and they're very keen on Gerard Waitley to come in and do some stuff on a Sunday, and he ultimately came in 2004 and took over in 2005. So I was never destined to be in the gig for a long time, and I think that because there was a picture that looked a little bit like me from a well-known artist whose name escapes me, but my wife Jodie certainly knew who it was. I think she was disappointed with that, and I was a bit disappointed as well that maybe it wasn't as positive as it could have been, that they said that he's a bit intense and there's a bit of train spotting about the way he broadcasts with his stats and everything like that. But he's very passionate about the game. So, yeah, I was called The Screen for a little while, but probably my most notorious nickname was the serial killer from one Rex Hunt, who worked at 3AW because he reckoned with my head, I've got a head like a robber's dog. I'm a very ugly man, good head for radio, AJ. But I look like a serial killer. But my old man certainly wasn't happy about that. And Rex knew about it. Dad was racked with cancer by this stage in the early 2000s. And Rex rang and apologised. I said, look, I'm okay with it, Rex. And the other interesting thing about that, AJ, was that when I started at the ABC in 97, Rex had started calling us the Tobin brothers because he thought we were boring like funeral directors. And then word got out, you know, the young bloke, the new young bloke, he said, oh, the young bloke, he's a funny looking thing, Rex said. His old man runs a funeral company, not Tobin Brothers. He said, you're joking. Can you imagine how much fun Rex would have had with that? And Dad actually said, do you think he could change it to Raven Lonigan Funerals? Yeah. I said, oh, I don't know whether Rex knows that, but I did try and put that forward. And AW tried to sell him a package. He said, no, my son works for the ABC.
Yeah, okay, right.
So, yeah, it was interesting. I mean, look, Peter Booth was a bit serious about it, and Tim was a bit serious about it. But I think they realised that it was all a bit of laughter, especially with me involved and the family business being a funeral company and Rex calling us Tobin Brothers. Rex had a lot of fun with it, at my expense in particular.
Yeah, and now you're applying your trade for Game Face, mate. You've done a great job on the peninsula.
Appreciate that.
Over the last couple of years, the growth in the MPNFL and the Outer East, because of your contribution, is second to none. And you should really be proud of that, because it could have just dwindled away. But you are known all over the peninsula, and you are a cult figure, aren't you?
Yeah, look, I'm a cult figure. I think people, because maybe they don't have a great imagination. G'day to all the guys out there. I believe I'm the butt of many jokes at Mad Monday celebrations when people decide they want to put the skull cap on their head or put the buck teeth in the mouth. I think my teeth are a bit better than they were when I was 12, 13, 14. I had braces on the teeth for 3 or 4 years, but people can portray me any way they want. And I suppose it's a bit of a badge of honour that Game Face is working. Yeah. Glenn Carter's done a great job in making sure that we are getting to all the clubs on the peninsula, whether it be football or cricket. And we're breaking through with Outer East as well, and the Southern Football League, and Seeker as well in cricket, and also Cricket Southern Bayside. The netball clubs as well, women's football and cricket, cycling Victoria. So, look, I think my experience in all those sports helps as well. And my job is to broadcast. I wouldn't call myself the greatest writer. I certainly am not great technically. I think we all know that. I mean, the other boys have got to help me out there, and Reese and Will and Glenn and everyone, fantastic the way they help me in that area. But it's been a tough year not having footy. But, I mean, you've got to admire Glenn. He's an entrepreneur that is thinking outside the square. He's got ideas coming out of his brain, left, right and centre. I could have used another expression then. I suppose they are coming out of his backside, left, right and centre in a very nice way as well. I think you know what I mean. I think he knows what I mean. I love you, Glenn. And those ideas generally work. And Game Face Community News is another idea. I've got Helen James on board and she's fantastic. And so things are going well. And I think clubs are starting to embrace the fact that social media is where you have to go nowadays. I still love radio. I still see it as being very immediate, but social media is now probably more immediate, and we are trying to attract the kids and the young people, and that's the direction we have to go. And it wasn't something I was great at embracing. I started to embrace it in my latter days at the ABC before I was made redundant in 2015. But nowadays, it's so important, and you just have to be part of it, I think, if you are to continue in the media. And I think most people understand that. My guys that I teach at Swinburne Sports Media, which I really enjoy, I mean, most of them, they're better than me. I often have trouble getting on because my computer's not working or my internet's not working or I'm pressing the wrong button, which Reese and all the other boys, George, etc., would know that that's Dan Lonigan at his best, but those young guys are always helping us out. So it's fantastic, and I'm really enjoying it.
Well, mate, I appreciate you coming on the show and having a chat about your career. It's certainly not finished by any stretch of the imagination, and I really do look forward to getting back in the commentary box with you in the cricket season and catching up for a cold one after it, and having a couple of jokes as we do throughout the day, mate. And all the best, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Again, congratulations on the new addition to you and Carly. He's an absolute beauty. Good to see him earlier today. And you're right, AJ. Look forward to working with you. Hopefully the season gets underway soon. And remember, get your Game Face on. Thanks again for having me.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.